There's a new spin on casual dining near Drake University. Lucky Horse Beer and Burgers. Craveable faves, flatbreads, delicious burgers, frozen cocktails, and a crazy cool vibe. Get to Lucky Horse Beer and Burgers today.
The morning news on YourIowa.com is brought to you by the Commission on U.S. Territories, striving for equal representation around the globe, and by Keep Iowa First, committed to keeping the Iowa caucus the first in the nation contest in selecting the presidency of the United States. And now here's your host, Brent Roske.
Good morning, everyone. Happy Thursday. It is January 28th, 2021. We have a fascinating show today. Retired three-star Admiral Mike Franken is going to join us and talk about Biden's cabinet picks. He actually wrote this letter, ran in the Sioux City Journal, amongst other places, in support of Biden's state and defense nominees. We're also going to talk about because he knows them personally. He's also going to talk about how he knows William Burr, who has just been nominated to run the CIA. So we will be chatting with Admiral Franken in just a little bit here. Also going to have on Iowa Safe Schools. They're a group that advocates for LGBTQ rights around Iowa schools. And there is some legislation happening at the Iowa State Capitol that we're going to be discussing. So lots going on today's program. Sadly, Cloris Leachman passed away. The Cedar Rapids Gazette says Cloris Leachman, Iowa native, Oscar winner, and TV star, dies at 94 years old. The Mary Tyler Moore Show actress was born in Des Moines. And Mel Brooks tweeted this. He said, "Such sad news. Cloris was insanely talented. She could make you laugh or cry at the drop of a hat. Always such a pleasure to have on set. Every time I hear a horse whinny, I will forever think of Cloris's unforgettable Frau Blucher. She is irreplaceable and will be greatly missed." So yeah, definitely some sadness going through the Iowa arts community. Every year, the Cloris Awards were something that was hosted here in town for local theater. And she was just at one of the local high schools just a few years ago. They named one of the theaters after her. So a sad day here in Des Moines, hearing of Miss Leachman's passing. We are going to play a video that the United Nations was kind enough to send over to us. The United Nations High Commission on Refugees. They're going to start doing periodic pieces on this program showing, sadly, conflict areas around the world and how we as Americans can help get involved and take some of the strain off of the United Nations, their incredible work that they do. And how we could help. And there's so many displaced people right now with all the conflicts around the world. So I'm going to play this 3-minute video about the United Nations High Commission on Refugees, and then we'll be right back.
When the crisis raised, all my dreams has been destroyed.
Yo nunca pensé salir de mi país.
Ile yote ilituogopesha sana. Mpaka hivi tulikimbilia mikono wazi.
So that is was from the United Nations High Commissioner on Refugees, and it looks like we have Admiral Mike Franken with us all the way from Washington. How are you, sir?
Hi, Brent. I'm fine. I'm sorry I can't dial in with my computer this morning. So you got me on my phone.
Well, happy to have you. It looks great. Always a pleasure to see you. What's interesting, I'm going to pull this up on the screen here real quick. You wrote this letter. It was ran in Sioux City Journal, amongst others, in support of Biden's state and defense nominees. And you have, these folks, and I just thought it would be really interesting for folks to hear, some of your stories about these folks. I guess starting first with your letter, you mentioned your relationship with Mr. Tony Blinken, who is now confirmed as the next Secretary of State.
Yeah, I think the nation is fortunate to have a person of his expertise. So my first interaction with him, he was a Deputy Secretary of State, and Nigeria had just had an election, and there were a couple other countries in Africa. I was the Deputy Commander for Africa and for the military, and so we visited a couple of countries, and in Nigeria in particular, sat with President Buhari and his cabinet early in his tour as president, and so I got to know him pretty well there, visiting throughout the country, et cetera. There's areas in the north that are Boko Haram areas, which are a problem, et cetera. So we have a security assistance program with them. Central African Republic, Senegal, a few other places. And he was always perfectly prepared, completely at ease, and he's the most organized person I have ever met. And from a military guy, that's something. I mean, that guy is just amazing. He's a machine. So and the other thing is, when you bring somebody in to be your outreach, like a Secretary of State, you don't really want someone who you've only heard of. To have that personal relationship that President Biden has with Antony Blinken is priceless, and that will put our country in good stead.
The next person you list in your letter, Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield, is now the Biden designate for the United Nations. She is currently undergoing testimony, questioning, Senate hearings, and facing some questions on past remarks on China and other things. You had very good things to say about her in your letter.
Well, hopefully we use our UN ambassador properly. And she is mild-mannered. When I was the commander of troops in the continent of Africa, yes, a Navy person on the ground, she was my interlocutor in Washington for the State Department, and she knows the area. She knows trade, the Middle East, how to work things in Washington, and has had experience with the UN. She's a very steady hand on the tiller, and will represent the United States quite admirably in the UN.
She referenced a 1950 Nobel Peace Prize acceptance speech from Ralph Bunche, the diplomat. He said, "The United Nations is the greatest peace organization ever dedicated to the salvation of mankind's future on Earth." But she added, "That's only true if America is leading the way." How do you feel about that, sir?
Well, I think that's right. I take issue in mankind. It should be, humankind, but we moved on since the 1950s. She's right. I mean, somebody is looking for a maypole out there, and that standard bearer is the United States. So we have excused ourselves from that in the America First, and I understand the principles behind it, et cetera. But you've got to be a benevolent and an altruistic outlook internationally. And we have kind of set that aside, but I think she will bring that back quite well. And she'll be very firm in her pointed arguments for such things as the Uyghurs in Western China, et cetera. She'll be a supporter of human rights and a more level development worldwide.
The third person in your letter who has now been confirmed, Biden's choice for Secretary of Defense, General Lloyd Austin. What's your background with him, sir?
Well, so we've missed each other a lot. He came to the U.S. Central Command after I had left. I was there for 4 years in the J5, which is the Plans and Policy Shop. But he was then previously in Iraq as we evacuated forces from there. And here again, a very steady hand on the tiller. I won't get into the issues of a waiver for his recent service, but ultimately, much like Tony Blinken, to have a personal relationship between the defense secretary and the president is indispensable. They trust each other. They work in a symbiotic relationship, and they know each other's perspective on things. And this is very helpful.
And finally, in an email to me, you mentioned that you had some background with William Burns. He is the nominee for CIA director. Here's what Fox wrote about Mr. Burns. He said he brings 33 years of foreign policy experience, making him the most experienced foreign policy, one of the most experienced for the position, and that Biden and Burns crossed paths during the Obama administration. Biden mentioned in a statement that Burns shares his profound belief that intelligence must be apolitical, and that the dedicated intelligence professionals serving our nation deserve our gratitude and respect. What is your background with Mr. William Burns?
Well, not frequent, but a number of times in the past, we've sat in the same room and sat in the same briefs. A guy of his intellect and experience worldwide. Here's the difference between the cabinets of 4 years ago to today. President Biden has chosen experts in their area versus businessmen, deal makers, people steeped in the profession of what they're doing. They are process professionals, and not people who are trying to strike a deal. We have people who are, here's a data point. We have people who are buying their second homes in Washington, D.C., i.e. their starter homes, and now they're on their second homes because they're making $180,000 a year, versus the people that Trump had, which were multi-gazillionaires. I mean, some billionaires even. I mean, it's a different perspective on things. Now, whether that's money is not really the issue, but it's where they came from, government service or not. Diversity, white men and a smattering of white women versus a cabinet that's a cross section of America. Experience in what they do, like Janet Yellen versus Munchin. The difference is a Wall Street person who was involved in Hollywood and other things, investments and buying and selling, etc., versus a person who was previously head of the Federal Reserve. I mean, that's kind of the difference of where we are. Blinken and Tillerson, someone who Tillerson was brought to the President Trump at the time. Here's an oil guy who's been worldwide. He's got a busy passport. How about him? He's also exceedingly rich. Okay, I'll take him. Versus Blinken, who grew up in the process and understands the world and has studied and went to high school in France. He understands Europe and he understands Africa and Asia, and he makes that his life's work. Ross versus Raimondo. I mean, a buyer and seller of defunct companies in steel, for instance, versus a former governor, a Rhodes PhD. It's a different perspective on things. It's a more gilded, a more educated, a more broad-minded group of people, and I'm a fan of that.
3-star Admiral Mike Franken from Washington, D.C. this morning. Always great to see you, sir.
Well, I'll see you in Iowa here shortly. I'm coming back here after finishing business here.
Fantastic. And folks, stick around right after this short message from Justice for Vets, a piece I directed with the cast of The West Wing. We're going to be with Iowa Safe Schools, talking about LGBTQ rights here in Iowa. So stick around.
A decade of war has taken an unprecedented toll on our men and women in uniform.
Most veterans return to our communities as leaders, but everyone's journey home is not the same.
Hundreds of thousands of our veterans are suffering from the trauma of war.
Without assistance, the downward spiral can be quick and destructive.
It doesn't have to be this way.
At Justice for Vets, we believe that every veteran should have the opportunity for treatment and restoration.
Justice for Vets is the only national organization dedicated to the expansion of veterans' treatment courts.
Veterans treatment courts hold our veterans accountable for their actions.
By providing structure, treatment, and mentoring, these courts help our veterans and their families get their lives back on track.
And veterans treatment courts work.
We ask much of our men and women in uniform, and they ask little in return. It is our collective duty to come to their aid when they struggle on the home front. This not only honors their sacrifice, but makes our communities stronger.
A donation to Justice for Vets helps put a veterans treatment court within reach of every veteran in need.
A donation to Justice for Vets keeps veterans in treatment where they belong.
A donation to Justice for Vets shows your commitment to leaving no veteran behind.
A donation to Justice for Vets will help save lives, restore families, and rebuild communities.
Get involved and go to justiceforvets.org.
Veterans fought for our freedom. Now it's our turn to fight for theirs. Thank you.
Welcome back to the program. Up on the screen with us, we have Becky Ritland and Damian Thompson with Iowa Safe Schools. Thanks so much for being here this morning, everyone.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Oh, it's truly my pleasure. So lots going on here in Iowa State politics. And I was just hoping kind of first, if people might not be familiar with Iowa Safe Schools, I wonder if you could just kind of give people a little background to what you do, and then we'll go into some specifics as to what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. So Iowa Safe Schools is the only LGBTQ youth serving nonprofit here in the state of Iowa. We are one of a few left in the country, and really founded in 2002. Our whole mission is really just providing safe and supportive learning environments and communities for LGBTQ students. We know that students who identify as LGBTQ are more likely to experience pretty much every victimization out there, and also face a lot of issues when it comes to bullying in schools, acceptance by family members, and overall just needing some advocacy and support in their communities. So that's really what Iowa Safe Schools is all about. We do everything from working directly with student groups to working with our educators and community members to make sure everyone has all of the information they need to support those students.
Great. Well, thank you for being here. There's some positive news out of the Capitol, Iowa State Capitol, and some not so positive news. Let's start with what Bleeding Heartland is a local publication. They reported last night the Iowa House unanimously votes to outlaw the gay trans panic defense. Iowa House members voted 95-0 to prohibit criminal defendants from claiming any violent crime was justified because of emotions related to discovering the victim's, quote, sex, sexual orientation, or gender identity. And there was just some short remarks on it, but it was voted 95-0. So some potentially positive news there, but there's some other legislation going on that maybe isn't so in line with what you folks are hoping to do. Why don't you give folks a rundown of what's going on at the Iowa Capitol right now?
Yeah, so in only essentially a few weeks of session, we've already seen 6 explicitly, blatantly discriminatory bills against the LGBTQ community. Specifically, most of them are being targeted at trans youth. The first one that we saw, Senate File 80, was a bill that would allow parents to be notified if a educator or administrator in a school was using the correct pronouns for a transgender student, which would obviously out a trans student to their family, and in many in immense danger in many scenarios. So that's obviously a great concern. We're also seeing some really backwards bills. And we had one that in the same bill, it would empower conversion therapists to abuse children and also punish medical providers, legitimate medical providers, for providing best practice care for trans youth. This is medically necessary care that is essential for many of our students across the state, and so we're also opposed to that bill. We had a bill more broadly that was introduced into the House Judiciary Committee that would essentially allow the legislature to override the Iowa Supreme Court had any will or win. And we've only got to assume that was partially inspired by reproductive rights choices coming from the Supreme Court, but also from some of the groundbreaking LGBTQ cases, including marriage equality, Iowa being one of the first states. So that, amongst a few other things, is kind of the playing field that we're on this session, and we're fighting hard to get some of this stuff stopped.
You know, a few years ago, Iowa was looked at as a beacon, being a forward-thinking state in this, but it seems like things seem to be stepping the opposite way. Do you attribute that to anything? What do you see going on in the state?
I mean, a lot of people...
Sorry, go ahead, Damien.
I was just going to say, a lot of people might point to our Republican trifecta, which has kind of held steady for the last few years, but I think... that we are actually still a civil rights leader. Like you said, we've been in the past, I'd say even all the way to the civil rights movement. I mean, Tinker versus Des Moines is a landmark case, amongst other things, because we do have Republicans in the state house that stand up for LGBTQ youth and for our rights. One major name that always comes to mind is Representative Bobby Kaufman. He's been our champion and continues to be this year on our ban to conversion therapy in the state of Iowa. So I don't ever like painting Republicans with that broad brush, because we do have folks that are helping us out. And we actually, every single one of the 50 LGBTQ bills that got killed last session was because of either House or Senate Republicans. So we are still a leader, I would say, in answer to your question, but we're just kind of stalling a little bit.
And Becky, why don't you explain to folks who might not know, conversion therapy is a term that's obviously getting a lot of talk right now at the Capitol. Why don't you explain to folks what that is?
Yeah, so conversion therapy is an incredibly outdated and archaic practice of attempting to change an individual's sexual orientation or gender identity through a number of, quite frankly, abusive practices, whether that is inducing vomiting on an individual, physical, sexual abuse, all the way up to kind of talk therapy, electroshock therapy, kind of like anything that, you know, kind of goes into trying to associate pain or shame or kind of ill feelings towards an individual's own identity, whether that's their gender identity, their sexual orientation, or even their gender expression. And so what we know is that there has been a wave in the last year or two of states and even municipalities saying this is wrong, we stand against this, but we know that there's still a lot of work to do, which is why that is an issue that we are very passionate about. And quite frankly, it's a nonpartisan issue, right? That at the end of the day, all students deserve to be safe and supported in their communities, and allowing conversion therapy to continue, and the legislature not taking a stand saying conversion therapy is not something that we will stand for in the state of Iowa is really just wrong.
And finally, Becky, if an Iowa youth is watching this, Iowa Safe Schools is obviously focused on Iowa's LGBTQ youth. If someone is watching this and facing discrimination, harassment at their schools, what would you like to say to them? How can they reach out to your group?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a number of different resources, whether that is individual advocacy and helping an individual their own rights and empowering their own student voice, all the way up to having conversations with educators, or even providing things like literature and affirming resources. So students can actually go to www.iowasafeschools.org, or give us a call here at the office, which is 515-381-0588. There's a number of ways to get in touch with us, and if they go to either one of those sources, we'll get them connected with a staff member who serves their area of Iowa, since we do work in all 99 counties.
Fantastic. Becky Ritland and Damian Thompson are with Iowa Safe Schools. Thank you both so much for being on this morning.
Thank you so much, Brent. Happy to be here.
Thanks, Brent.
Folks, we're going to show a video that the White House was kind enough to send over to us about the launch of the new administration, and we'll be right back.
Every morning, millions of Americans are joined together by a simple act. They get up, and they go to work. They do it without fanfare, without complaint, when times are easy and when times are hard. And right now, times are indeed hard. Because this morning, there were also millions of Americans who didn't go to work. We're hurting, we are mourning, and we are struggling. At times, it can feel like we've never been more separate from one another, in more ways than one. But we can change that. And we will. Because we can choose to see that we've been connected all along. Connected by a love for this country. By a continual drive to improve upon it. Connected by the shared dignity, the quiet respect of an honest day's work. Yes, this morning, millions of Americans woke up and they went to work. And we did too.
Folks, that is our program for today. Tomorrow, we are going to be chatting with Saul Lieberman. He works at the Institute for Political Innovation. We're going to be discussing this book. Catherine Gale right there was one of the authors. She's one of the founders of the Institute, and Saul Lieberman will be chatting with us about that. And looking at politics in an interesting way. They took a business lens and looked at politics. And basically, my chat with Saul and what the Institute is about is saying, you know, the system of politics right now is not only broken, but it's actually designed to do what it's doing, which is simply keep people in power. So fascinating chat with Saul Lieberman tomorrow. We're also going to have local actor Erica Tomey is going to be on talking about the different ways she can find ways to express herself here in Iowa. And then Luke Bradford, a director from the United Kingdom, has made an amazing short film about the African continent. You're going to want to see this tomorrow. So much going on here at your Iowa morning. I couldn't be more grateful to you for tuning in, and I will see you tomorrow.